March 13th. And they've not been meeting since then because of the COVID-19 situation. They're scheduled to reconvene in person on June 11th, which is a Thursday. And already committee hearings have begun to ramp up, especially the Appropriations Committee that determines how tax revenue is spent, including education. So the House and Senate Appropriation Committees have held joint meetings. They're on their third now, which have primarily been presentations from economists, from others familiar with the Georgia budget situation and the economy in Georgia. On next Tuesday, I believe it is, the Education Subcommittee of the Senate Appropriations Committee will meet. It's interesting that this is May 26th, and this will be an in-person committee hearing. It will be live streamed, but also people can attend in person if they wish. There'll be more presentations at that committee hearing. There is work going on behind the scenes. As you probably know, the governor and the appropriations committees have asked every agency and department to submit 14% budget cuts. 14% for education is about $1.6 billion. I was on a conference call with NEA last week where Ohio was complaining that they had to accept $400 million in spending cuts to education. We're looking at 1.6 billion. And that's why you're beginning to see local districts put out plans or explore options that include furloughs, pay cuts. I believe one county school system has announced that they intend to increase class size, which is obviously in opposition or antithesis to learning, and maybe not the most advisable course when the coronavirus is still out there. Now, there are ways that we can avoid this $1.6 billion cut to education. There is a rainy day fund or reserve fund that the state of Georgia has, which is $2.8 billion. That could be applied to education. I understand there's a provision in law that allows the state to borrow money up to $1.3 billion during times of an emergency. There are other groups like the Georgia Policy and Budget Institute that are calling for new tax revenues, increases on sin taxes, for example, cigarette taxes, and elimination of some very generous corporate tax breaks that the state offers now. But we're just beginning that process where we're going to see what kind of cuts are going to be made to education, and they could be draconian. The Georgia Department of Education, Board of Education met last week, and it appears that they're proposing 14% cuts across the board. No prioritization of spending priorities, just 14% to every program. And that could have really a devastating effect on our schools, students, teachers. It's a dangerous situation.
Yes. When you said 1.6 billion,
Yeah.
I recall during the Great Recession that the cumulative cuts we experienced during those austerity cuts was 2 billion. So it sounds like in one fell swoop, we're getting almost what we got over 4, 5, 6 years.
You're right, and that's just K through 12. It doesn't include cuts to higher education, pre-K programs, things of that nature. Effectively, state funding for K through 12 education is about $10.6 billion a year. So that's how we come up with, approximately $1.5 to $1.6 billion. And the unfortunate thing, I think, Lisa and Justin, is that the economic impacts of the virus are going to be felt for a number of years to come. And that will be a painful situation. But we're doing our best to stay engaged in the process, to have our voice heard, to recommend options other than a blanket 14% cut. But DOE is essentially punted to the local school districts the cuts that they want to make. And some are looking at furlough days, like I said, increased class sizes, salaries, any number of things. But we may have 181 different ways to approach the situation. But hopefully, and I will point out that the governor said 2 weeks ago when asked about the budget cuts that his priority is still education, and he's at the front end of the question to him about budget cuts, he answered that education is still his top priority, and the teachers who work on the front line and the ESPs that work on the front line. So I'm hopeful that once the appropriation committees get together and discuss this thing, that they'll make priorities about what different state programs are most important, and that education will end up at the forefront of that. But it remains to be seen.
Joe, I'm actually glad you mentioned there's several different ways that locals will be doing this. And so what I also want to see as we are watching from our cell phones, our other devices, as our members are on here, please, please, please comment and let us know what you're hearing from your particular local school districts, as that's how we're going to address this locally as well. And so we want to make sure we hear from you and what's going on in your locals. I think we've heard from about 2 or 3 of our locals. And so as you attend your virtual school board meetings, please, please, please share that information with us. And even if your district is already talking about doing furloughs, budget cuts, those types of things, please share them with us so that we can address those as your leadership, as well as the organization that is going to be, that has been, and will continue to be there for you as educators and public education.
Good point.
Yes. So, Joe, is there something in particular that our members can do as we move back into a legislative session? I know some of them may want to come to the Capitol, or some may not feel comfortable coming into such a large group. What can our members do to have their voice heard throughout this process?
Yeah, stay engaged. We send out regular legislative alerts about what's going on at the Capitol. There very well may be specific calls to action to ask people to call or email their legislator, or even attend the Capitol if they feel comfortable with it. You know, beyond the budget and COVID-19, there remains a question about other education-related bills that are still eligible to be considered during this legislative session. Among those, for example, are the voucher bill, there's the high stakes testing bill, there's bills affecting TEKS and TRS, and it's unclear right now what non-budget, non-COVID related legislation may be considered during this time. The Speaker of the House, David Ralston, had a conference call with the Georgia Chamber of Commerce this week that we were on, and the Speaker opened the door to those kind of other legislative priorities and indicated that he was going to ask the Senate, you know, what are their top legislative priorities outside of budget and COVID-19. And I'm afraid that could be something like vouchers, and we may have to engage again on that to stop that in the House. I think we have good arguments against the voucher, not only on merit, but also on the fact that it's a huge expenditure at a time when the state just simply can't afford it.
Joe, Lisa, if I may here, Joe, we have a question from John Tibbetts. It says, or a comment and a question. He says, furlough days are a teacher tax. What are school systems offering in exchange for cutting teacher pay?
You know, and that goes back to your point, Justin, about trying to get as much information from the local level as possible. I realize that not all of our members are comfortable being in a position of having to oppose their employer, for example. And I think GAE can fill that role quite in a very valuable way. So we need information about what's going on in the district. I know, I can't remember, it was Fulton or DeKalb announced 10 furlough days. Catoosa or Walker County announced furlough days. We're going to be working hard to ensure that state money is there for school districts so that the damage done is minimal. But we can't do it without our members' specific individual engagement and without their engagement in their local process. And sharing with us the kind of plans that different local districts have is very important for us to stay on top of that.
We have one more question from our NEA director, Daniel Sobchak. He says, what is the likelihood of killing the SSO credit? And it's a 2-part question. So that's one question. What is the likelihood of killing the SSO credit? And then number 2, what savings will come if Senate Bill 367 is passed and signed?
SSO might be a better question for you or Lisa to answer. Senate Bill 369. I'm assuming that's a piece of Georgia legislation. We've gotten to the point in the session where the bill numbers kind of run together, so we give them different names. Oops.
I think 367 is the testing bill.
Oh, that's a really good question. You know what, actually, so the whole testing issue is really interesting and one that's up for discussion. And I think maybe a valuable point to be made. There may be savings from the lack of testing that was done at the end of the school this year that can be applied to perhaps new testing at the beginning of school late this summer and during the fall. But because I think there's a real question that teachers have about the learning gap since kids have been out of school since mid-March. So that's a great question and a point that I'll be sure to make to the legislature once they reconvene about what testing is needed. I need your input on that too, so that we have a better grasp of what our members want and need. SSO is a student scholarship organization.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what he was referring. Yes.
Yeah. So the same.
I'm sorry, jargon and acronyms, right?
Yes. Yes.
I'm still learning the language. Sometimes those special needs scholarship or vouchers, as we call it. Unfortunately, the bill passed the Senate comfortably. We did have a number of senators stand with us and support us. This is a bill that is eligible for further consideration in the House. It is in the House Education Committee, which is not what I consider a friendly committee to education. But other than the merits that we have to argue in opposing the bill, which are that it essentially is a taxpayer-funded private tuition for wealthy families, which is what it is, and that this bill greatly expands it. Besides the sound arguments that we have, I think that there's a potential $500 million cost to the program over 5 years. I wouldn't want to be a House member that makes a vote to spend that kind of money in this kind of climate to benefit wealthy parents and their kids that go to private school. So I'm hopeful that it doesn't come up at all, but if it does, we certainly will be armed and ready to fight for it. And Daniel, will be calling on you to help us out and communicating with the House Education Committee members and others.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Joe. Lisa, I don't see any other questions for Joe. So we do want to thank you so much for your time, as well as the amazing work that you do for us. Well, we would say down at the Capitol, but virtually now as our amazing lobbyist. So thank you so much, Joe.
My life feels like it's turned into one long Zoom call.
Yes.
I can't get out.
And here we are again, right?
Yeah. I'm going to drop off and listen to the rest of the call if that's okay with you guys.
That's fine.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. So one of the things that's going to be a very big issue as we look at not only funding going back to school, but safety for our members and our students going back to school. And there are some things with that are very important, and we need to be in contact with not only our legislators, but our local school boards as we go back through that. And GAE has a coronavirus clearinghouse that we want you to take a look at. And it is at gae.org/coronavirus. And some of the issues that have been coming up during this time, you will find more information about, and hopefully some things that will help you as we move forward.
Yes. Even when we talk about safety, Lisa, I'm glad you mentioned safety, not just in particular for students, but also educators. When we talk about health concerns, such as our members or our educators who have those pre-existing conditions, also realizing that an individual can be asymptomatic and being a carrier and never know it. And then we'll be back at shutting the schools down again. And so it's important that we take safety and place it at the forefront when we're turning back to the school or considering how we move forward for instruction in the fall.
Yes, and that's one thing that the asymptomatic, that is definitely going to be an issue, because I know my school building, there are about 900 people there during a day if we have a full school. And that is a lot of children and adults in the building. And we certainly don't want to go back into a situation where we end up with a majority of any one school. That's just the most frightening thing I think about this entire pandemic.
Oh yeah, and so definitely one of the things that we have to consider and must consider is the people who are at the decision-making table, and why it's important to elect leaders who want to get kids back and educators back safely into the classroom as well as the educational setting. And so we've already talked about the safety piece, but then we talk about the homework gap. You and I are both classroom teachers, and both in DeKalb. However, even when it talks about instruction, or when we consider instruction, it looks very different. Lisa and I both teach in very different parts of the school district, same school district, but different experiences. And we've got to reach a place to where we're advocating for all children, regardless of their zip code. So we talk about the homework gap. Lisa, you've shared stories before about your kindergarten babies just not even being able to do it.
Yeah, and Justin, one of the things that I think about, and I know we have had some districts doing great things where they're putting, because in our rural areas, we don't have broadband and we don't have internet. And, I know you grew up in a more rural area, and I did too. And when you don't have those things, even when the district brings the bus, and I know AT&T's working with the state to have some of those buses to bring the internet. But if your family has one vehicle and mom or dad took the vehicle because they had to go to work this morning, then the bus with the internet access sitting in your high school parking lot or your grocery store parking lot or your town square, you still don't have that access. So we have to look a little bit deeper than just having a device and then the access to the internet. Is that truly giving our students what they need at their level to be able to close those gaps? Because we know they are there.
Oh, yes. And we definitely shouldn't substitute this whole, like technology. It will never replace that quality in-person instruction. So that's definitely something. And even when we, consider our students with disabilities and how that looks like. So it is just, oh my gosh. I see some of the comments coming in. Our wonderful Karen Soheim asked, what about protecting educators and educational support professionals in the high-risk groups, including above age 60 or 65, depending what source one reads? Yes, that is correct. We have some amazing educators who are at those ages, and, just making sure that they are safe. I don't think a lot of school districts are taking into consideration the CDC guidelines, as Joe mentioned earlier, like increasing class sizes. That would just be terrifying to me.
Yeah, and Justin, it's a great point about our educators that might be in those high-risk categories. But even if the educator is not in that high-risk category, chances are that educator has someone at home that is in a high-risk category. Even our early career educators that are just starting out in the field, they have parents and grandparents that they don't want to take something home to those people they care about. And so we really have to consider that CDC guidance before we can open safely.
Oh, yeah.
And like you said earlier, one thing that's going to be key to that, it's coming up in 90 days now. We have an election, people, on June 9th in our state. And if your school board is on that election, because it's a primary, and if your school board is nonpartisan, then it's on this election June 9th. And it's the school boards that are making these decisions. That's one reason we all have to vote.
Oh, yes. So, Lisa, I'm glad you mentioned voting June 9th, the primaries, all of those things, because was it Saturday?
Yes.
Lisa and I were both there on where we told you GAE partnered with Fair Fight, an amazing webinar session as we talked about mail-in ballots and voting absentee. So one of the things that one of our staffers, Grace Akan, shared with us was the voter protection hotline number. It is 888-730-5816. And so, Lisa, would you like to share with us maybe why that number could be important?
That number could be very important because we want all our members to know we want you to vote, and we want you to vote safely. And the safest way to vote is to vote with your polling place being your coffee table or your kitchen table or your end table, whatever table you want. So it is not too late for you to request an absentee ballot. The recommended date is next Tuesday, May 26th. And 1.5 million Georgians have requested that ballot. The ballot's mailed to your home, and then you can mail it back in, and they must receive it by June 9th. And a lot of the counties, you can go to the Fair Fight website, and it will help you find in your county where if you don't want to put the stamp on it and mail it back in, you can drop your ballot off so your vote can count and you can vote safely. Because
and it has to be done, it has to be submitted and received by June 9th, not postmarked. It has to be received by June 9th. So make sure you remember that.
Right. And the thing is, you can go on the Secretary of State's website, My Voter Page, Georgia, and you can see once your absentee ballot has been accepted. I actually did vote by mail, and I checked last Friday, and they have received and accepted my ballot. So I know my vote is going to count. Justin, have you done yours yet?
I have
Yes.
I've done mine. So yes, so we're on the same page there. But Lisa, I will say one of the things that helped me, so I received my ballot, right?
Yes.
And I was like, okay, who do I vote for? Because that's the question that goes through every voter's mind, right? You're like,
yes.
Who do I vote for? Now I had to think about, I'm an educator. And so, being an interest voter, I was like, okay, who do I vote for? Now, one of the things that was very helpful for me was, and I will say, was just going to the GAE website.
Yes.
The GAE website includes our endorsements. So we are an organization that endorses pro-public education candidates, legislators. And so under news you can use, I was able to find those legislators in particular that I needed to vote for who support public education. And that's it, It wasn't dealing with party. It was just, these are people based on the questionnaire that was provided to them from GAE, answered it, and the Political Action Committee decided, hey, this is who we need to endorse. And so that's where it was very helpful for me. Anything you want to add to that one, Lisa?
I just glanced down and I saw we have some of our members who have already gone to our website and saw who those public educators are. Wendy Morgan, I know you know Wendy as well. She is shouting out that in District 53, GAE has endorsed Colton Moore as the pro-public education candidate. So we want all of you to go to that website. There are 32 legislative races there, and there are also congressional endorsements that we have made that these people are going to be pro-public education and support public education here in Georgia. And we're going to ask you to do a little bit more. contact your local president to find out what you can do to help support these endorsed candidates. We all know we are educators and we don't have a lot of money to donate to those candidates, but we can do other things to support them. And as we're doing Zoom here and we're doing everything virtually, there are ways that we can virtually support our candidates and help their campaigns.
Oh, definitely. Sharing out their information, phone banking,
Yes.
sending out text messages, those types of things. And so you're right, Lisa. There are ways that we can support them, get them out there before June 9th. We will also start the process shortly after the primaries. The primaries for the general.
Yes.
So we're definitely looking forward to that and getting those questionnaires back from our candidates. We do send them out to every candidate, every qualified candidate.
Yes, and every qualified candidate receives one, but if they don't send it back, we can't consider them. And that's something that some of our members could do. If you know some candidates and they haven't sent it back, say, hey, did you send that back to GAE? Because we will send it to every candidate. And a lot of times people don't send it back to us, so we don't know that they are willing to work with us.
Yes.
So before we end this evening, I have a couple of websites that we want to shout out with some information for our members. If you're not getting all your information, and sometimes that happens, we want you to go to the NEA 360. It's mynea360.org. And when you go there and sign up, it will allow you then to go in and make those changes, because we know sometimes people move, they get a new phone number, and you can actually go in and enter your corrected personal information yourself, so that you will then get all of the information that GAE is sending out to you.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one we want to talk about is the NEA member benefit site has a laptop webinar series. So maybe next week or the following week, once you've kind of de-stressed and calmed down from the end of the school year, if you want to do some professional development to help you get ready for when we go back, it is there on the member benefit site. And also, if it's your first time ever going to the member benefit site, when you sign in, it's going to ask you to do your beneficiary for your NEA complimentary life insurance. And some of our members may not know that just by being a member, you have a complimentary life insurance policy. So go to member benefits so you can make sure that your beneficiary that you prefer being your beneficiary is who is listed.
That's important, Lisa. I definitely have placed mine out there, made mine. I won't say who it is because I think both of them are watching this live. And so, I'll just let them figure it out. But no, we have had that conversation.
Yes, well, and that's, especially if somebody has, it may not be who, I don't have children. So right. I have a nephew, though, that is like my child. So we really want our members to make that their choice of who they want.
I will also say, since we're talking about just the member benefit side, and you mentioned the professional learning, professional development, I would also take a look at the NEA micro credentials. They are amazing. There's over 100 micro credentials there. They give you a certificate afterwards, and you just simply upload that. So you know how in TEACS we have certain things that we're supposed to do. I know I mentioned that word, right? So that would be really good, beneficial to you. You can take them as groups. So that's a suggestion even to our locals to complete those in a group virtually and just say, this is our micro-credential certification in it. And so definitely check those out on the NEA website as well.
Yes. So One thing we wanted to do today before we end is we wanted to give you something uplifting and something inspiring. So, Justin, do you have yours ready?
I do. As Morton Linder taught us,
Yes.
you always want to leave them with a warm fuzzy, right? But
Yes.
no, one of the things I really do want to do is give a huge shout out to all of our spring 2020 graduates. Congratulations, you have made it. I think if we do the math correctly, you were kind of born during 9/11. And so here
Yes.
you are at this time making it happen. And so we are ecstatic. We're proud of you. And so just continue to strive for greatness because it lies within you. The world is waiting on you. Go after it.
Okay.
And
And
thank you all to the members for being members, dedicated members. Go out and share the great news of all that GAE is doing, has done, and will continue to do just for you.
And Justin, I want to end by, did you see what the state of Indiana did for their Teacher of the Year this year?
No, I didn't on that one.
They named every teacher in the state as the Indiana Teacher of the Year. So from those of us at GAE, we don't have the power to name all of you the state Teacher of the Year. But for our hardworking ESPs that have continued to provide our children with the nutrition they need during this time, and for the educators that took on this Herculean task of going from classroom instruction on Friday to virtual instruction on Monday, in our hearts, you will always be the educators of the year for 2020 and beyond.
Yes. So continue to stay safe. We love you. Thank you.
Stay safe. See you next week.